Hello everyone, this is Fahed. I'm here with Poppy.
Hello.
And this is the third episode of Audiobookish. Today we're going to be talking about The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. Would you like to introduce Monique, Poppy, please?
I can do. So here's her bio. So Monique Roffey was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and mostly educated in the UK. She is the author of 6 books, 5 novels, and a memoir. 3 of her novels are set in Trinidad and the Caribbean region. The White Woman on the Green Bicycle, 2009, was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in 2010 and the Encore Award in 2011. Archipelago, 2012, won the OCM BOCS Award for Caribbean Literature in 2013 and was shortlisted for the Orion Award 2014. House of Ashes, published in 2014, is a novel drawn from historical events and tells the story of a botched coup d'état. It was shortlisted for the Costa Fiction Award 2015 and longlisted for the OCM BOCAS Award in 2015. A new novel, The Tryst, was published in July 2017 by indie press Dodo Inc. Her memoir, With the Kisses of His Mouth, traces a personal journey of midlife sexual self-discovery. She is a lecturer on the MFA in Creative Writing at the Manchester Writing School, Manchester Metropolitan University, and tutor for the Norwich Writers' Centre. Her 7th book is The Mermaid of Black Conch.
And I will read out a description of Mermaid of Black Conch. April 1976, St. Constance, a tiny Caribbean village on the island of Black Conch at the start of the rainy season. A fisherman sings to himself in his pirogue, waiting for a catch, but attracts a sea dweller he does not expect. Aycayia, a beautiful young woman cursed by jealous wives to live as a mermaid, has been swimming in the Caribbean Sea for centuries, and she's entranced by this man, David, and his song. But her fascination is her undoing. She hears his boat engine again and follows it, and finds herself at the mercy of American tourists landed on the island for the annual fishing competition. After a fearsome battle, she's pulled out of the sea, strung up on the dock as a trophy. It's David who rescues her and gently wins her trust, and slowly, painfully, she starts to transform into a woman again. But transformations aren't always permanent, and jealousy, like love, can have the force of a hurricane and last much longer. The novel's characters are an unlikely mix: a mermaid, a fisherman, a deaf boy, a Caribbean artist, a sweet Nan, and a benevolent white landowner. Miss Arcadia Rain's own love story is interwoven with Aycayia and David's, and the rivalries and affection in both families and the community are brought brilliantly to life. Themes of unconditional love, friendship, family loss are examined without sentimentality. Roffey manages to write convincingly about a mermaid, a legend drawn from the sea, returned to land to survive, heal and live again as a real woman in modern times. So, Poppy, this was your choice. How did you come across it?
Yeah, it was. So I followed People Tree Press, who published the print version, on kind of social media and stuff for a while, and I'd been seeing it and been really keen to read it. Partly the cover drew me, the title, the concept. I don't know, it kept coming up, and I kept thinking, yes, I really want to read that, and then thinking, yeah, I really want to listen to that. And then when we were looking for our next thing to listen to, it came up again, and I was like, now is the time. I'm going to listen to this, and yeah, I'm really glad I did. I loved it. What did you think?
I thought it was fantastic. One of the things we didn't mention is that this was the Costa Book of the Year last year, and I think that's really well deserved. It is a
definitely
beautiful, beautiful book. There's a lot to unpack.
Yes, I've got a big long list of things I want to talk about.
Yeah, I've got a big list to talk about as well. So do you want to kind of like go to your kind of the first thing that you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's a really nice feature of the audio that it's got some original music on it.
Yes.
So mentioned in the blurb about how the first time Aycayia and David meet, he's playing his guitar on his boat, and there are little guitar sections peppered throughout it, which I really love. I mean, firstly, it's really nice music, just enjoyable to listen to, but it really underscores Aycayya's verse parts really well, and especially there was a bit in chapter 8 where things have kind of got a bit more hectic and more emotional and more passionate, and you can tell that change in the guitar. It's not just sort of sweet plucking, it's got a bit more oomph to it. But yeah, so it was things like that just, I thought it was really good. And yeah, that's something you don't get when you're reading the book.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of split about music in audiobooks. I think you have to use it really carefully, and I think, like you, I really enjoyed the music you used in this because it just accented the narration. It didn't overshadow it in any way.
Yeah, agreed.
And coming to the narrators, I think overall they were both excellent.
Yeah.
I think what's the name of the male?
Ben Onwukue, I think.
Ben Onwukue. I think he did a superb job overall.
Yeah.
He's got this kind of like deep, almost baritone kind of tongue to his voice, and there's kind of like a lifetime of lived in experience and pain that comes through the narration.
Yeah, definitely. And for those that haven't listened to it yet and don't know, it's written in three kind of different voices. You've got the like third person narration, and then you've got bits of David's diary, and then you have kind of verse parts that are from the perspective of Aycayia the mermaid. And so the first two of those are narrated by Ben Onwukue, and then the third parts that are read by Vivienne Acheampong as the voice of the mermaid.
Yes, so I felt Vivienne was excellent in her narration.
Yeah.
There was a real, what's the word I'm looking for? There's kind of this earnest vulnerability and strength in her performance. You could kind of get that sense that she was quite vulnerable and she didn't really want to open herself up too much, but there's that kind of yearning for like a connection there as well.
Yeah, I get you. And I think obviously it is quite a stark contrast, those two voices. And for that, I'm quite glad that they didn't have her narrate Aycayya's dialogue in the main sections. I was a bit worried they might have done that. So we were talking in the pilot episode about His Dark Materials having different actors for all the different characters kind of as the dialogue goes through. I'm glad that they didn't do that. Obviously, it does mean that you're listening to it and this person has multiple voices. This character has multiple voices, but I think that was better. I think it was better to keep the sections separate rather than the voice of the character itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. If I've got a criticism of Onwukue's narration, I do feel that he did occasionally struggle with the female characters somewhat in terms of like giving them distinct voices. I think that's especially true of Arcadia Rain. I felt that he struggled a little bit there, but overall, it was. I wouldn't say it was bad, but it wasn't as strong as the other stuff that he was doing. I think particularly, I think my favourite character that he voiced was Porthos, the police captain, because he's got this really deep. It just
someone makes his deep voice go even deeper for that character, doesn't he?
It just kind of like it just made me laugh. Kind of like it wasn't like a comedic thing, but it's just kind of, when you hear someone speaking that deeply, it was just kind of like, it was just like, okay, yeah, that's. And he kind of gave the character a real size by putting on that deep baritone voice as well.
Yeah. And even just the difference between David and Life. Again, David's already got quite a deep voice, almost deeper than the narrator. You sort of keep going down in deepness. You've got the narrator, then you've got David, then you've got Life, and then you've got Porthos. You kind of, incredible to have that much range in just how deep you can go when you start off so deep already.
And the other thing that I really appreciated was the pace at which he read the text. It was kind of really not relaxed, but it's kind of very slow, deliberate, but yet rhythmic quality to the narration.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's really important to say. So I'm really big on accent stuff and accents in literature and film and stuff like that. I did a module at uni. It's partly why I chose the uni in the course that I did, to be fair. Really big into my accents and stuff like that. And I think it's one of the reasons why I like listening to audiobooks, because I get to listen to a particular accent for a really long time, plus they're telling me a cool story. So it's bringing things together. But I especially like with this one. So I believe it's sort of a Trinidadian accent. That's certainly what the author was saying, that they wrote David's diary parts in a kind of Trinidadian dialect that they're really familiar with. What I then imagine you get with the print version is that you have very standard English for the narration, and then it's marked by spellings and things like that, and dialect words in the diary sections. And there you do have a problem, and this is with everything that represents dialect and also everything that doesn't. If you then have the standard English as your narration, you've kind of given that a prestige, a priority. over things, which obviously, especially when you're talking about places with a colonial past, that can be quite problematic and difficult. And it's something that just is a problem with writing in general. But one of the good things about listening to the audiobook is that you then get an accent that doesn't need to be awkwardly represented in print words. It can just flow out like that for the full narration. You know, it isn't an English voice. It isn't whatever reading voice you have. It is this Trinidadian voice throughout. It's very much of that place. And I think that's definitely a benefit that you get of the audio.
Yeah, I'm really curious to maybe pick up a maybe paperback version of the book, because that is something that I wondered about as well, in terms of how the adaptation was done, because to me this sounded like it was written to be read out loud, if that makes sense. There's some books that you read and you can kind of tell they were written to be read on the paper, but this felt kind of written to be read out loud and narrated. It kind of had that quality to it.
Yeah, I get you. I definitely think we did the right thing by listening to it. And if anyone listening is stuck between whether they think they should read it or listen to it, I'd definitely say listen. The only thing I think we were missing with the audio is, with me looking at some reviews and stuff like that, people were talking about her like author's note and acknowledgements page, and we didn't get any of that, which is a shame. I would have liked to have had that.
Yeah, I think this is one thing that I was thinking about from the Sandy Toksvig book that we did, was that if we had like some notes in the, you know, either in the chapter headings or maybe just a list of notes at the end of the audiobook somewhere, that would have been really useful in terms of like cross-referencing different names and stuff. But yeah,
and I think for the acknowledgements page, definitely, because the thing that I'd heard about it on, they were saying, oh, and I found loads of more resources that I could go and research from her acknowledgements page, and I was like, oh, well, we didn't have that. So yeah, that might need something kind of written. I mean, we were talking last time about the difficulty if you want to look something up and you don't know how to spell it. If you just read out a long list of references, that's not going to be great. But things like the author's note, I think really can just be read by one of the narrators. And I think that'd be good. And it made me think back to more audiobooks that I've listened to and gone, actually, yeah, these probably did have an author's note that maybe wasn't included. And I think that's a massive shame. I love little things like that. I know everyone doesn't want to read them, but I think they're really cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wasn't aware that there were author notes that kind of explained the research. So let's get on to the story.
Yeah.
I guess. So it's kind of like boy meets mermaid, mermaid gets captured, and then boy rescues mermaid. But it's it's such a good story. It's so so well told. So I think we're gonna start getting into spoilers from here on in. So if you've not read it, here is your warning about that. So we're introduced to David. He's a fisherman, and he comes across Aycayia, who's a mermaid, and they make this connection. And then the inciting incident happens, which is the capture of Aycayia by the fishermen. So I just want to know what you felt about the Americans, Tom and Hank Clayton, and how they kind of related to Aycayia and to the rest of the community as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, they definitely don't, do they? They're complete outsiders, and they refuse to listen to what any of the people of Black Conch are saying. They refuse to consider them, and they see just as their property. I mean, there's a big difference between the father and the son, but the son is still very much complicit in that. And I think that complicity is a big part of the whole novel, really, isn't it?
I would agree. So I think so. One of the themes that does run through the novel is how things in the past can damage relationships in the future, and kind of ignoring things like colonial actions. And you know, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that complicity. If you just ignore it, that's being complicit in what's happened in the past. He wasn't doing enough to kind of separate himself from what his dad was trying to do.
Yeah. Something about that capture that I really did find interesting. So the way the whole book is told, there is a lot of flash forward, flash back, kind of dropping a bit of info here, a bit of info there. And you kind of, you know, from very, very early on, I mean, this is quite early on anyway, but from really early on, you know that she does get caught by some Americans, but you don't really know the nature of it. So I was sort of imagining a lot worse. Like,
Yeah, I was fearing. I was like, Poppy,
yeah.
what have you got me into? I'm not really.
Sorry.
Kind of, I thought it was going to
Yeah.
be kind of some gruesome kind of like, oh, I'm going to like, chop her up and stuff like that.
Well, exactly. So I'd read a poem for my A level, I think. It was GCSE actually. And basically there's this mermaid, and it gets like cut up and eaten and stuff like that. Like, it's really gruesome. And I was sort of imagining stuff like this. I was certainly imagining that this capture was an end point of the story. I thought the kind of love story stuff was going to happen first, and then there was going to be this capture that was going to be really devastating. So it's kind of interesting when that flipped and actually, oh, this happens at the beginning. And yes, obviously, it is awful what happens to her with her getting caught, getting hung up, what happens when she gets hung up, and all that stuff. But she is then rescued later that night. So I thought that was, interesting, because it does drop you hints of what's going to happen, but it never spoils the story, because things are always a bit different than you expect.
Yeah, I think it's quite a tricky thing that she did there. It's quite a brave thing to do as well, because throughout the story, we do kind of get, especially with Aycayya's narration, quite often I felt that was at points in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I felt it's a really tricky thing that she was able to execute quite skillfully.
Yeah, and it really is a tricky thing, and she does manage it throughout. I think there was maybe one bit, and I could have missed it. They're often talking about like, oh, and then she hadn't even told me her story yet, and I feel like we never actually got the point where she does tell the story. Like, I couldn't tell you when she tells David her story. Did you hear that anywhere?
Oh, did she? I'm not too sure if she told David, but I'm sure
she mentions some stuff to
either
Arcadia.
Arcadia and Arcadia's son.
Yeah, but she guesses a lot of it from like the people laughing in the clouds and stuff. But anyway, basically that was something I thought, because basically by that point we know it. We know what's happened to her. We know how she's been cursed and stuff like that. We do know that. But we don't need, I sat down and then she said this to me, and we don't need it telling us again. I appreciate that. But I think with all that mix-up of what does everyone know at different times, I think we needed something of, and that's when she told me her story. I don't know, I felt like I needed to know, when does this person know? Because there was so much of him saying in the past, she hadn't even told me yet, as in, okay, well, she does tell me in the future, but I couldn't pin down that point when it happened. Very, very little criticism, but just with us talking about how difficult it is to balance that. And that's what I'm saying. It's not really a criticism, because it is such a difficult thing. There's a lot of moving about. There's a lot of leaving mystery, but then dropping a little hint. And it is a very difficult thing. And I think that's why that slipped through the gap. But for me, I kind of wanted it pinned down a bit more with stuff like that.
Yeah, see, that's not something I picked up
Fair.
on at all. But it's coming to think about it now, then I can't actually think of the point where they had that conversation with each other. So, but David and Aycayya's relationship's kind of at the heart of the story, and after David rescues this really tender sort of sequence of him trying to rehabilitate her, and her being not too sure what's going on, and kind of them getting used to each other living in that house.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I definitely wanted to say, so I think the picture that you'll have used, certainly the picture that I've got on my phone with the audiobook, has, the tagline, a love story. And for anyone who's like me and isn't really that massively into romance novels, don't be scared off by it. There is a love story in it. There are multiple love stories in there, but there's so much more to it. Don't think of it just as a romance novel.
Yeah, it's definitely not just a romance novel. There is a really tender relationship between David and Aycayya, and I think between Life and Arcadia, and dare I say even like Priscilla and
Porthos a little bit.
as well. But it's kind of a really, I love that, that section of the book where they're kind of trying to, he's not too sure what's going on, and she's not too sure what's going on, and kind of getting used to each other. I think that was one of my favorite sections.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. It's not often that I pick a favourite chapter, because I mean it's a bit of a weird thing to do, but genuinely I got to the end of chapter 4 and went, this is my favourite chapter. There were so many good things in it, but one of the good things was, like you're saying, about that relationship. And I wanted to pick out a particular quote that really, I know, stuck with me. Well, actually, it's kind of two quotes. So there's one bit where he goes, the narrator goes, he wanted to keep her safe always, but he also suspected that wasn't what she necessarily wanted or needed. And
that's a beautiful sentence, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. And we need that. Do you mind if I go on a little side rant?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so we've been watching The Umbrella Academy recently. Have you seen it?
I've read the graphic novels. I've not seen
I've done it the wrong way around. I need to read them, but
Yeah, of course I've read the graphic novels, but I've not seen the TV
that's
show.
fair. But anyway, Luther is the fucking worst, and I hate him so much. And because he sees it in the opposite way to this, he did the kind of, I want to keep her safe. I nearly lost her, and I don't want to lose her again. I'm going to keep her safe and therefore not pay any attention to what she wants. Whereas if he paid attention to what she wanted and actually treated her like a fucking person, then shit wouldn't have happened. So that's just a very recent experience of a different, fiction where a relationship has been really broken like that. I appreciate he thought he was doing a good thing by keeping her safe, but the important thing about relationships is that it's not always what you need, because then you just have one person that's being controlled. They're not being themselves. It was that thing. And then there was another quote. He wanted her, but he also hoped she could be free to be whatever she wanted. It is that beautiful thing. I'm not saying he's perfect. There is some points where, he wants to be the man of the house. Obviously, in some ways, he has seen her a bit as a possession. Sort of partly because of her being a fish, there's that awkwardness. I'm certainly not saying he's perfect, but there's moments like that. He wanted to keep her safe, but he knows that's not what she needs. It's just perfect, and I just wish there was more fiction out there that showed that about relationships, that didn't tell people, oh, well, if you've got good intentions, then you're not doing anything wrong. Actually, no, sometimes your good intentions are wrong because they're not putting the other person first.
Yeah, I think one of the notes I've got written, well, two notes I've got written down here is about kind of feminism and how the way women treat other women, and then kind of masculinity. We've got lots of different examples of like masculinity in this book. We've got David, we've got Life, we've got Poor Force, and we've got the Americans as well. And they all kind of are trying to thread, especially with the Americans, the relationship between the father and son, where the dad doesn't think that his son is like man enough. And it's kind of it's kind of an interesting point, the way men are trying to navigate relationships with other people and what's expected of them and what society expects from them as well.
Yeah, again, one of my weird things, I'm just exposing myself having a load of weird issues with stuff, but I really hate stuff that is like, men are like this, women are like this. And I think the important thing to remember that I need to keep telling myself is that those things are mostly from the voices of the characters who have been brought up to believe that, and have been brought up in this is what Black Conch men do. Like that's a quote from the thing. So I do appreciate that, but I don't like kind of men are this, women are this. And it doesn't ruin the book at all. And it is an important thing that they're exploring in the book. But if you're like me and you don't like being basically different genders being put into those boxes, the book doesn't do a lot to break those boxes, which is kind of somewhere I thought was lacking. Like it almost tries with, like you say, the American son, but don't explore his story very much, which I'm fine about. That's all right. But yeah, I think there was a lot of this is what men are like, this is what women are like, that I don't love. Doesn't ruin the book for me, but yeah.
See, I think what was interesting about, it's not one of the main themes of the book, but one of the impressions that I got from the book was that how these roles that we give ourselves kind of create rods for our own backs in certain situations. I think, for example, with Life, his pride was really hurt by the fact that he's living basically in a house not built by slave owners but built by colonial power, and that kind of hurt his masculine pride, and people calling him a house N-word also hurt his pride as well, and that caused him to kind of miss out on the first 10 years of his son's life. And who's that really benefited? It's not benefited him, and it's not benefited his son, and it's certainly not benefited Aycayia as well. And that
definitely.
So I think it's an interesting point that you raise. It's not something she's not necessarily looking to break the barriers that was set up in that time.
Yeah, I think it's because if you can reframe your mind and say that the kind of stuff that she's looking at is about masculinity and femininity, like you say, then I'm all on board. It was just the kind of the repetition of women are like this, men are like that. I don't love that in general world. Like it always comes up, in everything, just sort of little jokes and just everything is always there. But yeah, for people like me that kind of think that there is that. But then equally, you do look on things that I do think it is important of the gender. So things like how women treat other women, that, that is a big theme in here. The
Yeah.
kind of the jealousy and the hatred, and that is an important thing that does need to be looked at in that way, as opposed to just those abstract concepts of masculinity and femininity.
That was, for me, one of the most interesting parts of the book. So in the story, Aycayia is cursed by the other women in her village, or in her tribe, to this, eternal curse of being a mermaid. And we only get her side of the story. It doesn't sound like she did anything too terrible.
Yes.
She just, was talking to different men, and different men kept on approaching her because they so desirable.
It's, again, one of those things where you've got to piece it all together. So at the very beginning, I wasn't sure if she was a prostitute, with saying about men visiting her.
Yeah.
And then kind of, it's not a blame on her, but that other women were blaming her, even though they should be blaming their husbands if they don't want them going visiting prostitutes. But then you learn later on, actually, no, she hasn't. She's actually a virgin. She's not had sex with anybody. And it's just that they wanted her. And it was in a culture where they were allowed to have multiple wives. But the women were jealous that their husbands were leaving and trying to marry this woman, or not even leaving, just trying to marry this woman. Basically, she was just minding her own business, doing absolutely nothing, but men wanted her, and therefore she was cursed with this, basically, chastity belt that is the fishtail.
Yes. So I was really curious about the tribe, and I did, maybe my Wikipedia research is wrong, but from what I understand, it was a matriarchal society, so it was the women that had all the power in that society. So like when you, and I don't think that necessarily comes through in the book, it kind of sounds like a more machismo, kind of like paternalistic society, but it's definitely, I think it was the women who had the power who decided to cast this woman out for whatever reason it was. It's a really terrible thing that they did. It's really awful.
And it's then mirrored in the future by Priscilla, who's basically exactly the same thing. She's jealous and therefore decides to punish this other person who's just been existing and has just fallen into that circumstance.
So I have to say, I think I love Priscilla.
No,
I think she is just like, she's so awful.
I do love a villain. You have got to love a villain.
Any time she was just kind of like, oh, you're so mean. You're awful, aren't you? Oh, I love it. It's like,
you are Porthos. You know you are.
It's just like terrible. Terrible woman, but
but so real as a terrible woman. She is a really good villain and really evil, but in a way that you could see people being like that.
Yeah, I think she wasn't like a caricature by any means. There's very much, thankfully I've not met someone like Priscilla.
Yeah.
I can imagine that people like her could easily exist, and anytime she was kind of being narrated, I thought it was just fantastic.
That is fair. Yeah, she was pretty good. I do think that the supporting characters in this are really, really strong.
Yeah.
Kind of we were talking about Arcadia and Life's love story being close to as big as the main love story. And I do think that's really wonderful. The main story is obviously about David and Aycayia, but the story that you get with Arcadia, with Reggie, with Life is so fleshed out. It's brilliant. I really love it. And things that, almost have nothing to do with the whole mermaid concept are still there, and there's such a backstory and such a love again, and so many things like that. I thought that was really brilliant, the supporting cast.
It is, to write one really powerful relationship in a book is really challenging. To have two relationships like that, I think it's not easy. It's this kind of like stunning achievement, really, to have these four characters whose relationships sort of have parallels with each other, and in a certain way, kind of Arcadia's relationship with Life, this longing for this man that's gone away, is kind of foreshadowing of what David's going to be feeling in the future when Aycayia eventually leaves. So I think it was a kind of a nice way of showing what David's potential future's going to look like by exposing what was happening to Arcadia in the present as well.
Yeah, very good point with that.
So kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about was, I felt the year of 1967 was a really interesting period in which to set the story. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that at all.
I'll be honest, in sort of a terrible way, I kind of didn't. Like, the period almost didn't matter to me that much. It was sort of more in relation to, it being thousands of years since Aycayia was first there, and it being a good, half a lifetime before David's journal and stuff like that. But the actual time period, I guess because I hadn't researched much around it and things, I don't really know the significance of it.
Yes, I was kind of curious why she chose to set the story in this particular year, and it's kind of before cell phones, but there's still cameras and stuff like that around, and telephones and things like that. So I kind of googled 1976, and it's kind of around that time when things around gay rights, women's liberation, the civil rights movement was all kind of rising up. So I think that ties into why Life reacted the way that he did to certain things, and I think that certainly comes into the way with how Priscilla feels about Aycayia as well.
Yeah.
So you had kind of like a few points that you wanted to talk about. What was the next thing?
I did, yeah. We've covered quite a few of them, but I mean, one thing is that this is a very sexual book, isn't it? There's a lot of sex stuff in there. There's the kind of thing of the point that the whole thing is a chastity belt, basically, the whole concept of a mermaid. It all comes down to sex and money, with Porthos, with the Americans. It's all about that. And then you have the actual sex scenes. Yeah, and I quite liked it. I like stuff that is like that. I could have done with slightly less loin aching. It got to the point where they were just sort of in David's house, and he's like, "Oh, really? You're going to tell me about your aching loins again? Like, we get it. You want to fuck her? Get over it." I think some of it fair enough, but I think it got to a point where it's like, we know that. You can stop saying that now. And then I'm really torn about the sex scene with Acheampong and David as to whether it's sort of male gazy or not, because obviously it is written by a female. And a female who's written, as we said with the bio, other things on sex and stuff before. But it felt a little bit kind of that male fantasy of a mermaid, but one that you can actually have sex with, that really wants to do those kinds of things to you. That I'm not saying women don't, because we do, but even so. And also that you're that amazing that you just rock her world. And I might be being too cynical, and I might be a bit wrong, and I'd be interested to see what you think. And I certainly didn't dislike it, but there's just a little bit of that in there. And then there's a bit later when he says, "I had put on her all kinds of man dreams," which kind of suggests that he thinks that as well. And yeah, it was just a weird tension. I couldn't work it out.
Yes, I think there was a couple of things that I was thinking about as I listened to that section. So one of the things that occurred to me was that David is seen as a sexual object himself by Priscilla. So Priscilla doesn't want like any long-term thing with him. She's just furious that he's chosen to be with someone else. So I did get that, but I also take on your points about I'd have to listen to the chapter again because that's not something that occurred to me.
That's fair.
At the time, because I felt it was very much from Aycayya's that sense of she doesn't know what this is all about. These secrets that have been kept from her, like her sisters and all that sort of thing as well. So yeah,
and I think it's one that kind of, I don't know, I guess I just wanted to mention it for people listening. Like, feel free to let us know what you thought, because I have read a couple of other reviews recently about books with erotic scenes that have really criticised the sort of male gaze aspect of them. And it is weird, and obviously because everyone has different things that they like. And then some people say, "Oh, well, that's a really male or really female thing." It's like, well, actually, it's not. It's just an individual thing. And it's not. It's just sort of, I kind of wanted to put it out there. I don't necessarily think it's contributing to that male gazy stuff or anything. It was weird because, I did think a lot of it was kind of orientated for and stuff like that. But it was just, it kind of felt like the overall narrative was he's captured this mermaid who he's able to have sex with and really wants to have sex with him and he blows her mind. And it was sort of...
Yeah.
It felt like it was that fantasy, which then, like I say, David seems to then say that later on.
Well, he also kind of like David does kind of big up his own sexual prowess as well.
He does.
A bit as well. It's just like, I'm just fantastic in bed. You know what I mean, it's kind of so. There is. I think there certainly is a bit of that. But I also think it's really difficult to write sex scenes that aren't from the male gaze because, like.
Well, because
everything a lot of our culture is built on kind of seeing women as sex objects as kind of like described that.
No, definitely, and because of how much women are told that they're not meant to enjoy sex, then means that if you show something with sex being enjoyed, it seems like it is from the male perspective. It's that, circling back to the dialect stuff, there's a lot of issues that we're not going to fix that just are tricky with representing stuff like that, for sure. But it's interesting to talk about.
Yes, I think it definitely is. So,
Could I mention something else, Darwin?
yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Or just because, again, on kind of difficulties of representation and stuff like that. I'm quite invested in disability representation in literature as well. And I'm not disabled myself, but it's obviously very important. And I've been trying to educate myself better on it and things like that. And I think it's something that we can't ignore about this book. It says in the blurb about the different characters. So, you've got Reggie, who is deaf. You've got Aycayia, who is rehabilitated and learning how to walk again. You've got a character who's actually called Short Leg because of a leg deformity. And I read quite a lot of reviews after I'd listened to this, hoping to find some sort of commentary on this disability representation, and I couldn't find one anywhere.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it is important. And I'm not the person to say whether it's good representation or bad representation, because I'm not part of those groups. And I'd love to hear what people who are part of those groups think. There's some things that I thought were kind of good and some bits that I thought were kind of problematic. So, because Reggie is clearly used as someone else who is isolated, just like Aycayia was isolated in the sea. He has been isolated because he doesn't speak to the other kids because he can't hear them and they don't know sign language. There's clearly that, and I don't know how other people feel about him sort of being used in that way. But having said that, he is a full character with full personality and everything like that. And I did really love, again, from chapter 4, stuff about his independence and things like this. And there was a line that was, none of that trying like hell to fit into the hearing world when he was so permanently different. He wanted to be himself. And I really loved that. I hope I'm not wrong to love that. I did think that was some good
It's
stuff
interesting that so I think his disability is part of his isolation, but I think a really large part of his isolation is always that the fact of who his mum is.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's mixed raced, and kind of the era in which the story takes place. So I'm looking back at the book, kind of Priscilla's attitude towards white people. Certainly the way Life reacted as well when his son was born, just kind of makes me think, maybe there is, maybe race is another reason why.
Certainly, definitely, it's one factor of many. Well, then I had another one with that. So, like when Aycayia is learning to walk, that is obviously quite an important plot point and things like that. And it's always going to be a bit awkward. And like I say, I'm not the person to say about it. But what I would say is that there was a part, I didn't write down the exact quote, but it was something like about her learning to walk, and then it was like everyone does. And I was just like, that's just a bit shitty, mate. Because what you're saying then, if someone listens to or reads this who doesn't themselves walk, is I forgot about you. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
It didn't need that quantification. They could have said, like David did when he was young, or just like many people do, or something like that. Which, yes, someone might still feel a little bit alienated because they didn't have that experience, but at least you're not just outright saying I forgot you, which I think is what that everyone did, and I didn't really love that.
Yeah, it's not something I picked up on. To be fair, kind of like the disability angle. Kind of like, because I maybe this sounds a bit naive. I just felt that Reggie's story, I think part of it was about his deafness. Of course it was. It's a major part of his life, but I think for me, Reggie's story is really about his what his future was going to be and what his relationship with his dad was going to be. So maybe I was focusing on that a bit more than kind of whether or not his representation as a deaf person was fair and accurate.
Of course.
Or not. Yeah.
And I think that's perfect. And that's one of the good things about it, is that he does have so many different aspects to his personality that you find in a lot of books where characters have disabilities, and then that is it. That's all there is to them, which is shit. And that is one of the things you definitely can praise this for, is he has so much going for him, and he is so fabulous. But I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to mention it on this podcast. I didn't want to just not mention it, because I think people who aren't affected by it don't necessarily read those things into books. So read problematic books and go, this is amazing, everybody read this, and not realise that it can actually be harmful for people. And then new people read those books and they write their own books and they keep harmful things in there. And it's that kind of thing that I sort of just, like I say, I'm not qualified to say what's good or not, but I kind of want to be putting that out there and making people think about it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point. So I think I've covered most of the points that I wanted to cover. So I think in terms of recommendations, this for me is like, definitely go
100%.
out and listen to this book. It's absolutely fabulous.
Yeah. if you can't listen to it for whatever reason, then reading it, it's a phenomenal story. It's really well written, and you will get so much out of the print version. If you can and want to listen to it, definitely do that. I think there's a lot of benefits with, the accents and stuff, the different narrators, the music that we talked about, the pacing and everything. It would be my top choice.
It's really well done on the production, the music, the narration, and it's a fabulous book, and I can see why it's on the Costa Book Award as well. So yeah, definitely. Any final comments, Poppy?
No, I mean, I've spoken about loads. Thank you for letting me just jabber on.
Yeah, that's fine. Really, actually, I should thank you, because this is not a book that I would have ever picked up.
Yeah,
I just think kind of like, not really for me. But I'm really glad that I read it. So
good.
or listened to it. So thank you for that.
No, you're very welcome.
Please subscribe and leave a review for Audiobookish on whatever podcast app you're using to listen to this to.
Let us know on Insta and stuff what you thought of this book. We'd love to chat kind of outside of the podcast as well. That would be great.
Yep. Yeah. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at audiobookishpod. And please send us your recommendations as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.